All right, it's Monday, the start of the new week here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Excited to dive into it. We got a little football talk to get the week started after not the first full week of training camp. They started on Wednesday, practice throughout the rest of the week and a little bit over the weekend. Back at it in the South Side today, so we'll have lots of coverage for you at Panther-Lair.com. And in the meantime, let's get the week started with a little bit of Pitt football talk, position battles. Everybody likes to talk about position battles, which battles are up for, competition. There's competition everywhere, every spot. You got to earn your spot every day and all that stuff. But where are the competitions really happening? What are the positions you need to keep an eye on? And what are the positions that maybe, I would say at this point, August 4th, starting the first full week of training camp, what are the positions we have the biggest questions about? The ones that I'm the least certain about how they're going to be listed on the depth chart. Pretty sure who's going to be listed as the starting center. Pretty sure who's going to be listed as the starting linebackers, the starting safeties. But there's a few spots that, I don't know, there's a little uncertainty. Might even be some surprises. So let's talk about starting jobs. Let's talk about position battles. Let's talk about competition and get your week started right here on the Morning Pitt. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's the Monday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. The website below, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, Panther-Lair.com. Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, Pitt transfers, Pitt everything. Certainly Pitt training camp right now. Pitt basketball, because there was an open practice last week. We'll talk about that tomorrow unless some major news comes up. The plan right now is to talk a little basketball tomorrow. But we cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, we have message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out, talking with other Pitt fans about Pitt sports on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. We have our YouTube channel right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can get all of our Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Our weekly live show, which this week I think is going to be on Tuesday night. We're going to do it tomorrow night. Got some scheduling conflicts on Wednesday, so we're going to do it tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m., so tune in for that. It's always fun when we switch up the days. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about with me, Jim Hammett, and you. So make sure you tune in for that with press conferences, videos, interviews, all kinds of things right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe, and you will not miss any of our Pitt video content. All right, position battles. Some interesting ones. Some more than others. There's different position battles and competitions and open jobs that I think we've talked about all off season. We talked about throughout spring camp, but now getting into training camp, where we're getting a look at the players again, we're getting a look at how they're lining up, we're getting a sense of who's playing with who and who's doing well and who's standing out and all of that. There's really, I think there's a handful of spots that are pretty interesting where there might even be some surprises. Like, not major surprises. We know the main competitors, but I'm not entirely sure how they're going to list the depth chart and how they're going to start when they go out there to take on Duquesne on August 30th. Like, say, the left side of the offensive line. Now, this is an easy one. This is one that everybody knows about. They lost two starters there after Branson Taylor got hurt, and Ryan Jacoby and Jason Collier graduated. Eventually at the left tackle spot last year, they moved Ryan Bear over there. He's back over at right tackle. So you've got these two open jobs, and you've got a few guys competing for those open jobs, and they're pretty much all transfers, right? They brought in 3 transfers this offseason on the offensive line. Jeff Percy from Michigan and Kendall Stanley from Charlotte and Keith Gouveia from Richmond. And those guys are all kind of battling it out. Percy, definitely a tackle. Gouveia, definitely a guard or an interior lineman. He could snap as well and be a backup center, or, if he has to take over that job if Lenny Cooper got hurt or something like that. And then Kendall Stanley's a guy who started every game last year at Charlotte at right tackle. And then ever since he arrived in January, he's been working on the left side of the offensive line, and it turns out he could play left tackle or left guard. So you've got that versatility there. We actually have an article this morning with Pitt offensive line coach Jeremy Darveau about the options that those guys give them. That Percy's a tackle, Gouveia is an interior lineman, but Stanley being able to play tackle or guard allows the coaches really even more opportunity to find their 5 best offensive linemen. Maybe it's Percy and Gouveia on the left side. Maybe it's Stanley and Gouveia on the left side. Maybe it's Percy and Stanley on the left side. Whichever 2 of those 3 guys is deemed to be among the 5 best offensive linemen on the team will go in and start at those spots. And it can be any 2 of the 3. if you're set with Lyndon Cooper at center and you're set with B.J. Williams at right guard and you're set with Ryan Baer at right tackle, you really just need to fill in those other two spots. You've got 3 experienced veteran transfers to do the job. So where does the position battle stand right now? I think the favorites, at least from what we've seen through the first few days of camp last week, and it might have changed over the weekend. I mean, things can always change abruptly, but I think the favorites looked like Jeff Percy at left tackle and Keith Gouveia at left guard. But I also think the coaches are really high on Kendall Stanley. I think they love his athleticism. I think they love the way he goes out and competes. I think they think he's a really good offensive lineman. And I think he played really well at Charlotte last year. And I think the expectation said he'll play really well at Pitt this year. So I'm not sure if I see him being the odd man out, but I'm not really, I also don't know who I see being the odd man out. For a little while, I thought it would be Jeff Percy. He had the least amount of starting experience out of the 3 transfers, so he might be the guy who ends up coming off the bench, and they'll start Stanley and Gouveia. And then they got into training camp, and I thought, no, I don't know, maybe Percy's going to be the starter. I'm not sure, but I thought for sure Stanley would be a starter. And then it got to the point where they kind of discovered or decided that they could use Kendall Stanley as an interior lineman, and I thought, well, maybe Gouveia is going to be the guy on the outside looking in from that group of 3 guys battling for 2 spots. And so it's really kind of been, it's gone full cycle. It's back to now maybe being Percy and Gouveia, but I think that competition is going to be ongoing. What'll be interesting to see, and I don't advocate this because I don't think it's ever really worked out all that well that I can remember in times when this kind of thing has happened, but it'll be interesting to see if they go into the season and use some kind of rotation. And like I say, I don't really advocate that. I don't think it's really worked out well. I don't think they play the style of offense where you could take one of those guys and make him an extra tackle or line him up at tight end like they did with Ryan Jacoby every now and then, or Mackin South. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think they play that kind of offense. So I just don't see that fitting into a scheme using 6 linemen. And I don't think it's a good idea to rotate linemen, to move guys in and out every 2 series or something like that. I think you need to find your 5 best and stick with your 5 best. Right now, I just don't know which 2 of those 3 transfers makes the cut for the 5 best. So I think that's and that's a position battle we've known about, all offseason. And it's one we've talked about all offseason. And here we are at the start of training camp, and I think it's still very much ongoing and still very much one of the most interesting and probably the most important position battle on the team, because these other spots we're going to talk about, looking at my list here, pretty much every other position, they can rotate guys. So whoever ends up as the starter at some of these other positions we're going to talk about here, I don't want to say it doesn't matter who ends up as the starter, but whoever ends up as the starter, it's something of a moot point because you are going to rotate guys. Like the next position we're going to talk about is wide receiver. Well, they're going to rotate receivers. Even if they start 3 receivers, even if the same 3 guys start all season, which was virtually the case last year. I think Kanate Mumfield and Raphael Williams started every game last year, and Kenny Johnson started 12 out of 13. So, I mean, even if they do that, other guys are going to rotate in. Other players, other wide receivers will rotate into that mix. They might not get as many snaps as the starters, but they'll rotate in. And so that's what makes this offensive line competition, I think, a little bit more interesting because the guys you go with are probably going to be the guys that you go with, right? Like the ones that end up as the starters are probably going to stay out there for the full game. And then, of course, it's the most important because this team needs its offensive line to play well. And they need consistency in the offensive line and consistent, effective play on the offensive line, which they didn't have last year in order for this offense to really hum. So that's one. Again, we've been talking about it a lot all offseason, and here we are at the start of training camp, and it's still right at the top of the list when we talk about open jobs, position battles, competition, and all of that. Like I said, wide receiver is another one that's really interesting to me. I think Kenny Johnson's locked in for a starting spot. Beyond that, to me, it should be pretty wide open. I sort of feel like Raphael Williams is going to have a starting job. He didn't really practice all spring because he was hurt, but he started every game last season. I think Cade Bell really likes him, feels like he's a good fit for the offense and knows the offense well. And I kind of feel like he's probably going to be in a starting job again. I sort of would be surprised if he's not. But there is that third spot. Sincere Lee, I think, still coming back from his injury. I mean, he's practicing, but I think he got hurt pretty late in the season. So, I think there's some recovery time there. And then you got kind of this wide open competition. You got transfers who came in, Blue Hicks and Deuce Spann. You got some true freshmen who have been impressive, Tony Kinsler and Bryce Yates and Cam Sapp. You've got a few returning guys, Tyreek Robinson and Zion Fowler-El. And they're all sort of battling, not just for that starting spot, but for a rotational spot, because they're going to rotate 4, 5, 6 wide receivers. Guys are going to get on the field. They're going to play snaps and be part of it. And so if you have Johnson and Williams, and again, somebody could push Raphael Williams. I think somebody could push Raphael Williams for a starting job and playing time, but you're at least looking at one open spot. And I think the front runner right now might be Blue Hicks, the transfer from Louisville. I wasn't sure, in the spring who it might be. Again, Williams and Lee didn't practice in the spring, so I wasn't really sure. Andy Jean, the transfer from Florida, was here in the spring. I kind of got the impression that maybe Deuce Spann, the transfer from Florida State, was going to get a real shot there. But now I'm sort of thinking Blue Hicks might be the guy. There's a variety of reasons why I think that, just observations, different things people have said, and just sort of impressions I picked up on. But I think Blue Hicks might end up being that, I don't want to say that number 3 receiver or third receiver, but the third guy to fill out that group with Kenny Johnson and Raphael Williams. Now, again, this is just my impression after a few days of training camp, but I kind of get that impression that he might be the guy, and not necessarily the third receiver. Like, he might end up second in targets among the receivers behind Kenny Johnson. Maybe third in targets overall behind Johnson and Desmond Reed, but you get the point. I think he's going to be a real factor in this offense. I think he's going to play a lot, and I think he potentially could be in that starting job. So that's one I'm keeping my eye on. And then the other 3 spots where I think there's a real battle for positions and starting jobs is they're all on defense. And not surprisingly, a bunch of them are along the defensive line. Defensive tackle is interesting to me. You've got Sean Fitzsimmons back. I would say if there's anybody, I would give him pretty good odds of being a starting defensive tackle this season. He only played 9 games last season, but he started all 9 of those. It looks like he's been one of the top D tackles in camp so far, so I kind of expect him to be in that spot. But there's a question of who's going to line up next to him. And you've got Nick James, who started 10 games last year. You've got Isaiah Neal, who played a bunch in the rotation. Francis Brew, who played a bunch in the rotation. Jasir Whittington, who's ready to play after redshirting last year. You've got a lot of really good candidates, and all those guys are going to play. Again, we come back to the defensive tackle spot. We talk about it being deep. We talk about it being talented. They've got really good players there, and they've got a bunch of them, and I think they're going to see some time. All of them are going to see some time and make an impact. It's a question of who's going to start, which, like I said, is a bit of one of those moot points because they're going to rotate so much. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Isaiah Neal step into a starting job there. And not step into it, but earn his way into a starting job. Nick James, like I say, started 10 games last season. Didn't make a huge impact. Transfer from Indiana. I think he's a good, solid player. He kind of reminds me of some of those guys that Pitt had at defensive tackle, kind of before Kalijah Cansey's big breakout and after Kalijah Cansey's big breakout. Your Devin Danielsons and your David Greens and Tyler Bentley's like a big guy who can move a little bit in the middle, but doesn't necessarily put up a lot in the way of production. I sort of get that impression from Nick James. Whereas Isaiah Neal, as I think he's got the potential to blow up. You know what I mean? I think he can really break out this season. And I could see him battling and winning that starting job. Again, even if it's Fitzsimmons and Neal starting, Nick James, Francis Brew, and Jasir Whittington are all going to rotate in and play. But I could see Isaiah Neal winning that starting job next to Sean Fitzsimmons, but it's going to be a battle throughout training camp. Ditto for defensive end, where, again, I think you've got a guy who's probably pretty locked into a starting job in Jimmy Scott, but you got another starting spot that's open opposite him, and I think there's going to be a real battle there. And to be honest, I think the transfers they brought in will push Jimmy Scott as well. I think he'll hold on to his starting job, but I think he'll get a push from Blaine Spires, Joey Zielinski, and Jaden Moore. And I don't know who I really think is a front runner there, who I think is going to be the guy to start at that other defensive end spot. I'm highest on Jaden Moore, and I've talked about that a lot, that I think he might have the highest ceiling and the most potential. But I also think Blaine Spires is probably the guy with the longest career, the longest resume, the most production, most career production, most on-field, playing time, most experience. And so I can see him getting the job. But again, even if it's Scott and Spires who start, if it's Scott and Moore who start, if it's Zielinski and Spires, whatever the combination is, all four of those guys are going to play a lot. So it's a bit of a moot point, but it's relevant to talk about because they're all going to push each other. There's going to be a battle. There's going to be a competition to see who can get that starting job. I would probably think Spires is the front runner right now to start opposite Scott, but there's 4 weeks of camp, 3.5 weeks of camp or whatever left. There's plenty of time for that battle to unfold, and I think it will. And then the last spot where I think there's an interesting position battle to watch is going to be at cornerback. And at corner, they bring back Rashad Battle, started 10 games last year. Tamon Lynam started 3. They lost Rylan Gandy as a transfer to Indiana. He started every game last season. Battle and Lynam rotated in the other 13 games. Again, 10 for Battle and 3 for Lynam, but they all played. And so again, just like defensive end, just like defensive tackle, just like wide receiver, you're going to have rotations at cornerback, and at least 3, if not 4 guys, probably at least 4 guys are going to play significant snaps, with Rashad Battle, Tamon Lynam, and then Shadarian Harrison, and probably Rashawn Murray, the transfer from Cal PA. So who's going to start? And here, unlike defensive end and defensive tackle, where I think you've got a pretty clear-cut front runner for at least one of the starting jobs, and then the other one is up for grabs, I think this is a full-on race for these 2 starting spots, primarily with Tamon Lynam, Rashad Battle, and Shadarian Harrison, but I'm not counting Rashawn Murray out by too much. I think he might just be a rotational guy, and the starter will be 2 of the 3 guys who are returning from last season, but it's going to be a battle. And I don't know if Battle is going to win the battle. I sort of get the sense, at least early in camp, that Harrison and Lynam might be the top 2, but Battle's right there in the mix. He's obviously got a lot of playing time, a lot of experience. He's got more experience than any of these guys. He's old. He's in his 6th year or whatever it is. And so he's been around a lot longer. He's played a lot more. He's seen a lot more snaps and playing time and all of that. But Shadarian Harrison's really talented. And I'm more and more, obviously the most improved player on defense in the spring, more and more I'm thinking it's going to be tough to keep him off the field. Not just keep him out of the rotation, which is not going to happen. He's going to be in the rotation. But I think it's going to be tough to keep him off the field from the starting lineup. I mean, I think he is good enough to push himself into the starting lineup and really have that breakout year this year. Every time we talk about breakout players and guys to watch this season, he's one that comes up. When we ask the players for who is a breakout candidate, he got the second most mentions. We asked 20 different players, 21 different players, who's a guy we should be watching. 4 different players mentioned Shadarian Harrison. The only guy who got more mentions was Jeremiah Marcelin, the linebacker, who will be in a rotation at middle linebacker. I don't think he's going to unseat Braylon Lovelace as the starting middle linebacker, but he'll be in the rotation there. But Shadarian Harrison was right behind him. And I think for good reason. I think he's going to be really good. And so I might call him a front runner for a starting job right now, with Tamon Lynam and Rashad Battle fighting it out for the other one. I don't think Harrison is as far ahead for that starting job as like Jimmy Scott is for defensive end or Sean Fitzsimmons is for defensive tackle. But I think he might have a slight edge because he's just so naturally gifted. Like, he's just so sort of naturally talented. He dealt with some injuries when he first got to Pitt. You obviously have to grow and learn the defense and all of that, and it takes a little time. But I think he's there. And I think he's arrived, and I think he's healthy, and I think he gets it. I think he understands the defense. He knows what he needs to do, and I think he's going to go out and be really good for Pitt this year, and I think he'll be a starter. Who starts opposite him, still up in the air. And who knows? By the time we get to end of training camp, it could be Battle and Lynam. It could be Murray and Lynam, or Battle and Murray, whatever. Murray and Harrison or something. I think Shadarian Harrison will be a starter. We'll see. in the next few weeks. But that's what I see right now. 5 position battles that I think are very much up for grabs. I'm sure a week from now we'll find out about a new position battle that's up for grabs. And hey, we'll talk about that one too, because we do these Morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday, right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. We've got stuff for you every day. Morning Pitt videos, live Panther-Lair show, which we're going to do this week, Tuesday night at 8:30 p.m. Press conferences, post-game shows, interviews, video from practice, all that stuff right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com for all the Pitt coverage from training camp. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope you had a great weekend. Hope this week gets off to a great start. Enjoy your Monday, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.